Welcome to Hello World. We're usually taught that Hello World is where things begin, but in reality, it's where things stop being simple. This podcast is a simple coffee conversation about what comes after real systems, real teams, and the technical decisions that shape day to day work. Here with me today is Girish Shenoy, the Vice President of Technical Services at MicroGenesis. Oh, he also happens to be the founder of QuicFlow. Hi Girish, welcome to Hello World. What's up? How are you?
I'm doing good, thank you.
All right, so let's dive right into it. And we all know QuicFlow exists because teams were already doing like the same work multiple times across different tools. And every problem has that one moment where it just stops being theoretical and the problem just becomes unavoidable. So, what was that moment for you?
We spent hours not building, not selling, not supporting, just reconciling reality across our customers. Our customers were using a very well-known sync tool that lived for over decades. When the tool started giving our customers nightmare, initially we kept liaising between customer and the vendor, where it used to take 30 minutes to several hours to sync an issue between two Jira instances, or between two JSM instances, or between Jira or JSM. Our customers came back to us saying, if we can't fix it now, they will have to look for a competent Atlassian solution partner. That was scary. It was not our fault, but getting sandwiched between the customer and marketplace vendor hit us hard. My customers acted themselves as an integration layer, as the product they invested for sync no longer worked at the speed of business. That's when it clicked. That was the moment when QuicFlow was born. I wanted to give a world-class product that can sync data between Jira and JSM, or Jira to Jira, or even JSM to JSM on the cloud. Built for efficiency, built for scalability, built for security, and to sync at the speed of business.
Very valid point, Girish. So I'll move on to the next question. A lot of what you said made it sound like, synchronization is very simple on the surface, but really in practice, it is at the intersection of tools, processes, and people. And that's a whole triangle. So what would you say? What part of this triangle was the hardest thing to design for?
At first glance, you would think tools are the hardest. APIs, rate limits, edge cases, that's technical work, but it's predictable. You can engineer your way through it. Processes are messier. Every team says that they have a process, but in reality, they have a guideline plus exceptions. Still, you can observe patterns and model them. The hardest part by far turned out to be people, specifically ownership and trust. Synchronization means change in one system affects another. That sounds simple, but psychologically it's huge. Teams are used to their tool being the source of truth. The moment an external system can change their data, questions come up. Who's responsible? What if something breaks? Can I rely on this? So QuicFlow had to be built not just with connectors, but with guardrails, visibility, and security. People need to see what's happening. Trust that it won't break their world. Once we understood that, the product design shifted from data movement to confidence in automation.
Yes, Girish, very good point. I don't think I ever thought of that from this angle. So, QuicFlow is actually most valuable when it's barely noticed. So, how do you actually come to think of building something that is critical infrastructure, but also intentionally invisible?
Yeah, that's exactly the paradox. If QuicFlow is doing its job, nobody talks about it. There's no dashboard people check every morning. It just quietly keeps reality consistent across systems. So we had to shift our mindset from building a product people use to building infrastructure people depend on. Those are very different design goals. For us, it comes down to three things: trust, transparency, and control. First, trust means boring reliability. No surprises, no silent failures, no mostly synced. Infrastructure earns trust through consistency, not cleverness. Second, transparency. Even if it runs in the background, it can't be a black box. When something changes, people should be able to see what happened and why. Invisibility in the workflow doesn't mean invisibility in accountability. And third, control. Teams need to know they can step in, pause a flow, roll something back, override a rule. The moment infrastructure feels uncontrollable, it becomes scary. So we don't think of QuicFlow as invisible software. We think of it as quiet infrastructure. It stays out of your way day to day. But the moment you need to look under the hood, everything is explainable and manageable. That balance is what makes something both unnoticed and indispensable.
You're right, Girish. Unnoticed but still critical, right? So, at what point did syncing Jira instances, stop being a convenience and actually started becoming a business dependency for your customers?
Early on, one Jira instance often equals one team or one product. But as companies grow, reality gets more fragmented. You have different business units, acquisitions, customer dedicated instances, or strict permission boundaries. Suddenly, work that's logically connected lives in technically separate worlds. At that point, syncing isn't about saving clicks, it's about keeping the businesses coherent. A product initiative might span a platform team in one instance, an application team in another, and a customer facing implementation team in a third. If those systems aren't aligned in real time, planning breaks, delivery dates drift, and leadership reporting becomes manual reconciliation instead of insight. That's when it becomes a dependency, when Jira is no longer just a task tracker but part of company's operating model. If the sync stops, it's not an inconvenience. Roadmaps go out of date, commitments get miscommunicated, and teams start making decisions on inconsistent information. The shift happens when synchronization moves from helpful integration to the thing that maintains a single operational reality across organizational boundaries. Once a company hits that level of scale and separation, it's infrastructure, not automation anymore.
Yes, Girish, I think after this we can all agree it's much bigger than just an inconvenience when things like this occur, right? So, real-time sync, it forces uncomfortable trade-offs between speed, consistency, and control, three very important aspects. So, where did QuicFlow draw those lines? And what pushed you to the point where you just had to draw those lines?
It's a good question. We had to accept early on that real time is a product promise, not a physics guarantee. The real design question was, when those three forces collide, speed, consistency, and control, what do we protect first? We chose to bias toward consistency and control over raw speed. In theory, you can propagate every change instantly and optimistically, but in a real organizations, that can create cascading issues. Accidental updates, loop between systems, or bad data spreading faster than people can react. Fast chaos is worse than slow friction. That's why we invested heavily in conflict handling, rule-based scoping, and visibility into what changed and why. If two systems disagree, we don't just pick a winner silently, we make the decision logic explicit. What pushed us there wasn't theory, it was watching customers deal with the aftermath of uncontrolled automation. One bad rule or edge case could update thousands of issues across instances. The damage wasn't technical, it was operational trust. Once team feels automation is unpredictable, they shut it off. So we realized speed builds excitement, but control builds adoption.
I mean, a true verdict to speed: thrills but kills.
Absolutely.
So, as customers, scale from few projects to, entire programs, where do the complexities surface first?
When teams start, they sync a few projects with fairly clean mappings, status to status, field to field. It feels very straightforward. But as they expand to programs, the organization's operating differences start surfacing. Different teams use the same fields differently. Status names match but mean different things. One group treats priority as urgency, other as business value. What looked like simple synchronization becomes a semantic translation. So the first real complexity shows up in how work is interpreted, not how much work exists. That leads to more conditional logic. Only sync this issue type, transform this field under certain states, don't propagate changes from this side under these conditions. The flow goes from linear to policy driven. At that stage, QuicFlow stops being just a pipe and becomes part of the company's operating model. We are not just moving data, we are encoding how different parts of the organization relate to each other. That's why we invested early in the rule visibility, testing, and scoping, because scaling integration isn't about handling more tickets, it's about handling more nuance.
I mean, most of this really just screams flexibility, which is, attractive early on, but it does get dangerous at a scale. So, how do prevent turning QuicFlow from what it is now into an unmaintainable business logic over time?
Yeah, this is one of the biggest long term risks for any integration platform. If you only optimize for flexibility, you eventually become a hidden layer of business logic that no one fully understands, and that's dangerous. So we made a conscious shift from how expressive can rules be to how governable can they be. We push customers toward reusable patterns, mapping templates, scoped flows, and clearly defined rule types. That keeps complexity modular instead of tangled. Second, visibility is non-negotiable. Every rule, dependency, and data transformation has to be inspectable. If an admin can't explain why field changed, the system has already failed from governance standpoint. Third, we design for lifecycle, not just setup. And honestly, part of the answer is saying no. Some edge cases are technically possible, but create long-term fragility. We had rather protect the system's clarity than win a short-term configuration. The goal isn't maximum flexibility, it's sustainable flexibility, where the system still makes sense to the next admin who inherits it, if only the person who built the rule understands it. That's not flexibility, that's future technical depth.
Right. So, once teams truly start to rely on QuicFlow, what are some of the behaviors or some of the workarounds that you have noticed that, tend to disappear almost immediately?
That's a good question. The first things that disappear are the human glue behaviors. All the little manual acts people invented to compensate for disconnected systems. You also see fewer shadow trackers. Teams often keep private spreadsheets or notes because they don't trust the official system to represent their reality. When synchronization is reliable, the need for parallel truth sources drops fast.
I think that this podcast had a lot of points that does provide us insights not only into your product but also what goes into building one. It's not as easy as it sounds. Of course, there's a lot going on beneath the surface.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Girish, for being here today. And thank you everyone for watching Hello World. Until next time. Bye-bye.